SolidTales, History Uncovered. Today we're answering one of the most debated questions in World War II history. Who would win in a pure infantry battle between the US Army and the German Wehrmacht? No air support, no tanks, just boots on the ground and rifles in hand. Imagine a collision between two vastly different beasts of war. On one side, the United States Army, an industrial titan sitting on a bottomless well of resources. When they first stepped into the theater of war, they moved with the sluggish hesitation of raw recruits stumbling into a slaughterhouse. Yet, they possessed a logistical backbone that churned out tanks and aircraft with the relentless mechanical rhythm of an assembly line. Their philosophy was brutal and terrifyingly simple. If a problem could not be solved by a carpet of high explosives, they simply dropped another. By the mid to late war, they possessed the skies. Every bloody yard the infantry crawled forward was shielded by a sprawling canopy of fighter escorts circling like guardian angels. On the opposing side stood the German army. In the opening phases of the war, their tactical skill tree was maxed out. They struck with the blinding speed of a lightning bolt, executing maneuvers that paralyzed their adversaries with psychological shock. Their infantry operated like finely honed executioners, carrying out the directives of the general staff with the lethal interlocking precision of a Swiss watch. Before 1942, they were the undisputed apex predators of the European theater. But the true scale of this gap wasn't revealed until the Americans faced the Germans in battle for the first time. And what happened at Kasserine Pass was a brutal wake-up call, set against the scorching, unforgiving wastes of North Africa. This was the US Army's first large-scale baptism of fire against the hardened core of the German war machine. Waiting for them was the legendary Erwin Rommel and his Afrika Korps. For the Americans, it was a nightmare born of naive command structures and tactical chaos. The seasoned German veterans danced around the sluggish American formations, using rapid mechanization and pinpoint artillery to effortlessly shatter the Allied lines. Over a few agonizing days, the panicking US forces were shoved backward into the dust. When the smoke finally cleared, the numbers painted a picture of absolute butchery. The US suffered 6,000 total casualties. 1,000 young men were left dead in the desert sun, while thousands more bled out or vanished into captivity. The Germans suffered a mere 1,000 casualties, a staggering kill ratio of 6-to-1, a grim ledger of dog tags that proved a terrifying reality. If the pre-993 American infantry had locked horns with the Wehrmacht in a pure ground war, they wouldn't have been combatants. They would have been mere target practice, slaughtered before they even understood the rules of the game. But here's the thing about the Americans. They don't stay down. The slaughter in North Africa didn't break them. It forged them into a better army. The year 1943 marked a violent metamorphosis. The old, incompetent command structure was completely torn apart. Ruthless, aggressive commanders like George S. Patton stepped into the spotlight, hammering iron discipline and lethal tactical doctrine into the surviving troops. Simultaneously, the sleeping American industrial engine roared to life. The logistics networks hardened into an unbreakable lifeline, flooding the front lines with M4 Sherman tanks and P-47 Thunderbolt fighters. Through the grinding campaigns of North Africa and the treacherous, mountainous terrain of Sicily, boys were hardened into killers. They learned the bloody geometry of fighting elite German defenders in claustrophobic environments, stripping away their rookie hesitation. Furthermore, American combat doctrine evolved to integrate a terrifying new reality: total air supremacy. From the Pacific to the killing fields of Europe, close air support became the standard operating procedure. Whether pushing a massive offensive or desperately holding a shattered line in Italy or on the beaches of Normandy, American infantry moved under a protective umbrella. The skies belonged to them, and they used it to rain hellfire on anything wearing field grey. However, possessing the skies did not mean the ground war was a walkover. The ultimate test of this infantry rivalry came in the frozen hellscape of the Ardennes in the winter of 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. Here, Mother Nature stripped the Americans of their greatest asset. Blizzards, freezing fog, and impenetrable low cloud cover blinded the Allied air arm. Suddenly, the infantry were alone in the dark. Striking through the dense, snow-choked pine forests, German armored spearheads violently ruptured the thinned-out American lines. Panic gripped the front as supply arteries were severed. Yet, in the besieged, freezing foxholes of the Ardennes, the 101st Airborne Division miraculously tied down roughly 5 German divisions, using the rugged terrain to bleed the attackers dry. By the end of the nightmare, the US had suffered heavily, taking roughly 81,000 total casualties, killed, wounded, captured, missing, while inflicting roughly 100,000 total casualties on the Germans. On paper, this mountain of frozen corpses looked as though the American infantry had finally surpassed the Germans. But the reality was far more complex. The 101st Airborne was the elite tip of the American spear, enjoying the finest gear and training, hardly representative of the average infantryman. Furthermore, the claustrophobic forests neutralized the German advantage in massed armored maneuvers, forcing them into piecemeal, disjointed attacks. More importantly, the German army of late 1944 was a rotting corpse of its former glory. Relentless Allied strategic bombing had choked their fuel supplies to a trickle, paralyzing their fearsome panzers. Of the approximately 30 German divisions thrown into the meat grinder, a full third, about 10 divisions, were Volksgrenadier divisions. These units were scraped from the bottom of the barrel, aging men, raw youths, and the walking wounded, clutching substandard weaponry. Yet, even these shadow formations managed to suppress American lines during the initial shock. The truth is stark. From 1939 to 1943, the Wehrmacht's tactical brilliance, weapon systems, and sheer fighting quality eclipsed the American military. But by 1944 and 1945, the scales had irreversibly tipped. The Wehrmacht was fighting on fumes, stripped of its veterans, while the American army had evolved into a cold, hyper-modernized killing machine. To put it simply, the German army was a virtuosic master swordsman, capable of executing devastating lethal strikes in the opening seconds of a duel. But the American army was a heavily armored, hyper-resilient brawler with a terrifying capacity to adapt. The master might draw first blood and dictate the early rounds. But as the clock ticked, the brawler's endless stamina, unbreakable armor, and crushing weight would eventually drag the exhausted master down into the mud, grinding him out of existence. This is the untold story of the clash between the world's richest army and the world's most tactically brilliant army in World War II. History Uncovered. Subscribe to SolidTales.